folks. Man, I'm getting started 3 minutes early here. No one's gonna watch now, are they? Alright, hope you guys are having a good one. Welcome to the Newpub show on Wednesday. We might do some live writing too, depending on how long we want to go and whether I run out of stuff to talk about. Which is hard. Because I feel like I could just talk about stuff for 2 hours and not really get tired of it. But anyway, couple topics I want to cover regarding publishing at the beginning of the show. I'm always paying attention to what's going on in the publishing world, even though I'm not traditionally published, and most of my friends aren't either, right? Most of us are out in the indie world doing that thing, and we see a lot when we paid attention that there's problems with the trad publishing world. But there's a lot going on in the indie publishing world that I just want to address and get out there and get people thinking about, because you want to go into this with the right expectations, and you want to go into this with a good plan for how you're going to define success and how you're going to find success once you've defined it. Lots of people want to be indie authors because they want to make money. I actually think most people don't want to be indie authors to make money, but to be authors, because it offers a path for them to write books and have people read them. What they really care about is reaching an audience and having people like the stories that they write. And I think it's the same thing with musicians. Musicians really want to be recognized as musicians. They want to perform for people and have people listen to their music and enjoy it, more than they want to be millionaires or something. But I think with indie artists, the way that they tend to define success ends up being a monetary thing, because you can't win awards. The awards that you might win, or half of them are fake anyway. You know what I mean? So you just end up in a position where a lot of indie artists want to define all of their success on money. So you just kind of got to know what you want to do in that realm too once you get started with this. The truth is, right now, publishing, regardless of which kind of side of the coin you're looking at, it's really helter-skelter right now. A lot of the techniques for selling books that worked in the past are just not working right now. Lots of people are, and I've been seeing this really for years. I predicted a major ebook collapse about 3 or 4 years ago, and it happened, and a lot of people they called me crazy because of a really basic logical flaw that all of us make, which is line is going up, therefore line will go up, which is never how it's worked ever in the real world, right? We don't have unmitigated growth. We don't have continual growth. We don't have line goes up always. The stock market, line does not always go up. Bitcoin, people were like, you got to buy Bitcoin because line goes up. It's like, then line goes down, and they're like, oh no, what am I going to do? I remember the Stone Toss comic where people are freaking out as Bitcoin crashes to larger and larger values. The problem with Bitcoin, as an example, with line goes up mentality, is that the people who are freaking out because Bitcoin collapsed to $25,000 bought in at $50,000, right? They bought in because of this fallacy that line goes up, line will always go up. Well, line went up. Look, it went from 10,000 to 50,000. It's going to hit 1 million. Nothing's ever done that before, right? What goes up must come down. Growth doesn't continue forever. It hits barriers, it hits plateaus, or you have major market corrections, particularly with assets. So we've had a lot of that with the book business, is that the book business really, it grew following a lot of the acquisitions in 1997. When you had all these mergers happen, you ended up with the big 6 book publishers, and then the big 5 as more mergers happened. So the book sales went up. There was a thought they were always going to go up. Then they hit a plateau. Then they started going down, at least in TradPub. Well, what made up the difference was indie publishing took over. And it's like, now we have an opportunity to sell books directly to people. We can sell the books that they want. Line goes up. That's going to be limited. several problems with line goes up in ebook. And that is, in the ebook market, we have more and more and more and more authors selling more and more and more and more books to not more and more and more people. There's not more people entering the ebook space. People are buying ebooks. Are they buying ebooks at the same rate they were 10 years ago? I don't know anyone who is. And in fact, I don't even buy ebooks 9 out of 10 times. I will buy an ebook only if it is prohibitively expensive for me to get a physical book or I am traveling. Those are the two things. When I travel, I read on my phone. I know that there's people who are going to be like, that's a substandard reading experience. Yes, but it's cumbersome for me to carry a book in a bag, particularly a long book, so it's better to just have it on my phone. And so that's what I'll do. If I want to read, and especially if it's a book that I don't care that much about having on the shelf, then yeah, I'll just buy the ebook for it and read it on the plane. No big deal. No big deal for me at all. Or I'll read like public domain books on planes if I'm on the plane. And it's good. And then you can just turn off your phone and you're done. But I always buy physical books now. I never buy ebooks. I have a Kindle e-reader that my wife bought me in like 2014, and it was like the second one I've had. I have like a really big one, like one of the original ones, like the XL. And you know what I used it for was for displaying PDF sheet music at gigs and for practice. It was like, oh, cool, I can store all my sheet music on this and not have to flip through a binder, and worry about glare and all that kind of stuff. So that's what I used it for. Anyway, it doesn't work anymore. The stuff doesn't work when you stop using it. The battery goes bad, whatever. It's a piece of technology that breaks down and you have to replace it eventually with another expensive piece of technology. And so I don't know what they're priced at. I think they're pretty reasonable, but you have to think, how many actual physical books could you buy for the price of a Kindle that would sit on your shelf and be good forever, or you could give to people? Like, you can't really give ebooks very easily to people. Like, you can, but most people just, it's like, here's this book, read it. And if they have the book physically in front of them, they'll read it. And I position books throughout my house so that if I sit on the couch, I'm like, oh yeah, here's that Michael Moorcock book I was reading. I'll pull that up and I'll read some of it, I'm reading all the time. And it's always physical. So yeah, I don't see the ebook market recovering and like people magically making money on Amazon like they did 10 years ago. And I bring this up because I got a little message on Substack from someone who watches the show and watches the channel. And they're like, I'm doing all these things. And I was hoping my response wasn't too harsh, but I just wanted to get stuff quickly. It's like, he was worried about a bunch of things that didn't matter. Like what day you release your book, and can you release books too often? And it's like, you don't have an audience yet, so none of that stuff matters. And even when you have an audience, it probably doesn't matter now because of how helter-skelter the entire industry is. It's just most of this stuff doesn't matter anymore. So if you're looking at like guru advice regarding the Kindle platform from maybe 7 or 8 years ago, they're looking at strategies that worked maybe 10 years ago during the boom. And if you get in on the ground floor of any expansion, then you're going to be good. The problem is most of us are looking for a way not to get in on the ground floor of an expansion or to find the ground floor of the next expansion, but to find people who want to read our books, right? That's the main concern. The main concern is not the state of the publishing industry or like how bad the Dragon Awards are, how bad the Hugos are. Like, I don't care about really who wins Hugos anymore at all, because just like every time I hear this one won, I'm like, that doesn't look like a book I want to read. And maybe it's a book other people want to read, and that's good for them. I actually don't have a lot of judgment on that, but the publishing industry just has kind of decided, and it's always done this. It decides what it's going to put out, what each publisher is going to do, and awards are captured by various groups of people. It's not something that we need to get deep into, except to say that the industry in total is a lot crazier now than it's been. It's a lot less certain now than it's been. I can give basic strategies for like how to sell a book using traditional sales means, right? Like if you think about the Amazon page for your book, none of this has changed. What's changed is how you're going to get people to see it. So Let me explain that a little bit. But let me start with like, how do you sell a book on Amazon? It's really easy. You have a good cover that looks attractive and communicates accurately the genre and the story that the person is going to read, right? Or is interested in reading. So, if your book has an orc on it, like I'm thinking maybe of like John Douglas's book, it has like an orc on it. It's obviously a fantasy book. We could guess that it's about orcs, and so a lot of our preconceived notions about orcs are going to fall into that, and therefore that might be an interesting read. I've never read a fantasy story from the perspective of orcs, really, so maybe that's going to be something cool to read. And you click it, and it's a really attractive cover, and then what's the next step? There's going to be a blurb, what we call the blurb, which is just the book description. And there's a certain way to write a book description. You want to lead with the conflict. What is the problem that has to be solved? And then you're going to answer who is trying to solve that problem and who is trying to stop them. And then the third one is basically inciting the potential reader to buy the book, that they have to buy the book to find out what's in more. You don't have to say buy now to find out. Some people do that, and that's fine. I don't do that because I think it just seems cheesy. And I think a lot of people over the years have become hypersensitive to traditional selling tactics that you get with something like, like really traditional sales books, like how to sell. I'm trying to think of one that I've read a bunch of them. But when you think of sleazy salesman tactics where it's like, all right, I want to buy this, is like, all right, let me do the paperwork, because you don't want to say charge you money, right? It's like people are wise to that now. Like boomers were fooled by that kind of stuff, but young people, anyone born after about 1970 just doesn't. They just get completely skin crawled, turned off by sales tactics like that. So I don't like to put them in my book description, but you do want to like basically remind the reader, like, you got to find out, will John be able to save all these people with the magic powers that he found from the pixie land, or whatever your story is. And then you can usually have a tag if you've written any more books, like, this person also wrote these books that are popular, or this one that won an award, or this one that was a bestseller. Just basic sales. So you end with whatever kind of appeal to anything that you have. So if it's a social proof, you can have pull quotes from a famous author if you can get one. Or I don't know, people ask me for pull quotes, and I'm just like, I'm not going to do it because I don't necessarily have time to read your book right now, and I'm not going to give you a pull quote without reading your book. It's nothing against you or your book, but if it's not a book that I want to read, then I'm basically giving myself a lot of work as a favor to you. Do you know what I mean? I have to be really restrictive about how I spend my time because I have so little of it. Anyway, so you have that. Maybe pull quote from an author, maybe, what other bestsellers you might have if you've done this a while. Or if you have none, then you could just skip that. The next thing is people are going to have reviews. And so that's whatever they do. They click this, they look at the description, then they click the reviews. Almost every consumer does the same behavior. So you have to approach sales with the standard consumer behavior in mind. You're always going to find something that's like, I don't care about the cover. It's like, great, you're in the 1% of people who don't interact with covers, but chances are you're lying to yourself if you say that you don't care about the cover. The cover is what drew you to click on it to begin with, or to pick it up off the shelf in a bookstore. The same thing happens in a physical bookstore, but you don't have star reviews. In Amazon, you have all those star reviews at the bottom. So they click down there to see what other people are saying or to see what it's reviewed. And they will probably look at the star rating before they even read the description. Maybe even before they click, because if the star rating is displayed next to it, that'll do it. So the challenging part has always been the same challenging part, is how do you get enough people to read it and review it that you can actually sell it? Because it seems like we have the cart before the horse. If we need the reviews to sell the book, how do I get people to buy the book and review it if they won't buy it without reviews? So you got to really think creatively. You have to figure out ways to get people to buy it ahead of time. You have to remind them to review it. You have to maybe do cold emails to people who do reviews. And I'll just be honest, a lot of authors just buy reviews. Most of the products you see on Amazon, the reviews are fake. right? A lot of people don't know this, but I think most people these days just don't trust the aggregate thing. They're going to go look at individual reviews and see if they say anything important. Great product, would buy again. All right, that's not a useful review. That's probably fake. Hey, it's a great book, blah, 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 blah. Probably a fake review. Authors buy it all the time. It's against the terms of service. You can get your account banned. Don't do it. But I'm just telling you, authors do it for this reason, is that they need that social proof to sell it. Now, let's talk about that part. Hasn't changed. But that doesn't work as well anymore. And the reason is because fewer and fewer people are going to see your book on Amazon compared to how many people used to see it 5 years ago and how many people used to see it 10 years ago. Like, the best time to get in, your big mistake was being in the 8th grade instead of publishing books on Amazon. Right? So, the strategies that worked 10 years ago for getting your book to rank up in a niche category and get an automatic bestseller tag in like young adult, LGBTQ, Spanish translation fiction, or whatever fake category you want to throw your book into, that 2 sales will get you to number 1. That stuff just doesn't work anymore. It doesn't matter that it's a number 1 in some weird category. Amazon pruned a bunch of the categories anyway because they were redundant and stupid. Frankly, they just didn't do anything. They meant nothing to consumers except to fool them into thinking that there was a popular book there. How is this book a number 1 bestseller if it has 2 reviews? And the answer is it's not. It's a bestseller in some category it would be like Star Trek Spanish translation something, right? It's like that it doesn't belong in. So you get your book put into a really obscure category, and people who work in Amazon will do it, and you can get an orange tag. And I've had them in really things I didn't even mean to put my book into. It's like, this book is number 1 in Asian folklore. I was like, what? How did this book become number 1 in Asian folklore? Like, a Prophet of the Godseed was number 1 in something really weird. It was like Star Trek. It was number 1 in Star Trek books. At 1 week, I was like, what? It's not a Star Trek novel. But something about what was in the book, or what was in the description, or the keywords I used, I might have used Star Trek as a keyword. Amazon automatically put it into like the wrong category, and that category had so few sales in it that like selling 3 copies for the week put me in number 1, right? It was just like really stupid. But anyway, the problem is there's more and more and more books, and with AI, the amount of books being put on Amazon has gone from like, it was like a nice steady parabola. It went from like a nice steady parabola to like, 20x squared. It's just shooting off into space. There's so many books. There's like millions of books published on Amazon every year now for millions of readers. That means like no one is seeing these books or reading them or buying them. Half of them are done by AI. Amazon wants you to declare that AI was used. People just lie, right? No one is truthful about that because they're afraid that will downrank their book, and it probably does, right? So they just put as many books on as possible, and it's kind of like a stampede, right? It's like, well, we have to do the old strategies 10 times harder. It's got to be rapid release, 10 times more rapid. We'll do AI cover, AI title. We'll have AI write the description. We'll have AI. We'll use large language models to generate the entire book, and the only thing you'll have to do is put it on Amazon. And to me, it's like the main thing that should be scripted is just putting the book on Amazon. That would be the part that we really should have scripts for, is like, upload this to Amazon, and AI reads it and goes, perfect category, found it. Rather than AI writing the books, what we need is AI to categorize them properly. That would be a good use, but that's not what it ends up being used for at all, right? If you could have an AI read the book and know conclusively what books are going to be related, that would be useful, but that doesn't happen. It's all because authors don't want it. They want to fool, a lot of them want to just fool consumers. So yeah, you still need good sales pages. The problem is, how do you get eyes on your Amazon book? You have to do it outside of Amazon now if you want to do it at all efficiently. So there's 2 ways that you can do it. You can do Amazon ads, which is you're just reducing your royalties if you are going to make a profit at all. You're paying Amazon to show your book to people on Amazon's platform. I don't know how that's legal, but anyway, that's what it is. And so There's strategies that you can use to kind of maximize the return on that, and that would be writing like a 20-book series. This is the traditional approach to Amazon. You write a 20-book series, you spend buku money advertising book 1, and just hope you make money people buying all 20 of the books in the series. It's getting harder and harder to get people to buy that book 1, to buy the ebook of book 1, to buy anything of book 1, or to ever see it. So you can advertise off of Amazon, or you can sell your book using content marketing, which is what I've talked about a lot, and which is what this is kind of, right? Because I write books and you can buy them. Join my Patreon and you get this book for free. But that's also a solution, is like, if you are doing all the work outside of Amazon, why are you bothering to get people to go to Amazon? Why are you giving Amazon 30% of your money if you're doing all the work and they're not showing your book to anyone anymore? And the only reason I can really think of for that is that those star ratings will sell the book still. Okay. If you don't have a deep parasocial relationship with your readers, then the stars will still sell the book. And not only will the stars sell the book, but people want to buy things from Amazon because it's a trusted retailer. And frankly, I like to sell things through Amazon for similar reasons. I don't want to handle the payments. I don't want to deal with upset customers when the book takes too long to ship or something like that. It's not something that I want as part of my overhead, and I'll pay Amazon 30% cut to do that, to have the stars, to help me sell the book even if I'm bringing in outside traffic, and to be a trusted brand. In other words, when people buy a book from Amazon, they know that the book exists, that they're going to get the book, that other people have read it and left star reviews. All of that sales stuff still applies. The problem is getting people to the Amazon page now. And you kind of have to weigh your options as to whether you want, to what degree you need that extra social proof to sell the book, or you're willing to just sell it on your own website, because that's also a good option, right? Fabrizio says, the only time I ever regret buying books is when I have to move. I feel that. When I had to pack up my book collection to move here, it was like, wow, I have a lot of books. I have bought so many books. And I realized as I'm putting them into boxes, I've read all of them. There was very, very few books that I put into a box that I'm like, I don't think I read that. Every book was like, oh, every time I picked up, I remember this book. But one of the things I realized when I was moving, I gave a bunch of books away, was like, if I hadn't reread the book and it had been sitting on the shelf for several years, I knew I was never going to read it again. Which meant it needed to go to the used bookstore, right? Or it needs to get donated to charity, because I'm just not going to read it again. And that's okay. A lot of books are read once, and you don't need the experience again. Other books are read multiple times in your lifetime, and those are the ones that should definitely stay on your shelves, or the books that your kids are going to want to read, or the books that like you might lend to a friend. But that's probably going to be the same kind of books that you reread. So, different categories of book. But yeah, packing up books, like, man, I have way too many books. I have a whole room in my house that's just, it's my homeschool room, but it's also just, it's like wall-to-wall bookshelves, 4 walls of bookshelves. There's so many books. And we went to go clean a bunch out, and it was like, our kids like, you can't get rid of this book. I love this book. It's like, this is like a baby book. It's like, I'm reading it right now. You can't throw my book away. I love it. It's like, we found that book in a rental van. It was like in the back of a rented van, and now it's your favorite book, and we can't get rid of it. Okay, it's fine. I'm not going to throw away any book that my kids want to keep. One thing I've noticed as a teacher is that there has not been a meaningful book series to take the normies' interest in quite some time. It used to be Potter, then Twilight, then Hunger Games. Yeah, I'd say Game of Thrones was the last one, and a lot of that was due to the popularity of the series. And George R. R. Martin didn't have the whole thing finished. I agree. You're right. I've not yet owned a book I regret buying. There's books that I bought that I don't like, and I have to think, do I actually regret buying the book? And really the answer is almost always no. I don't regret buying it. I just wish it was better, right? And that's different. So like, I didn't make a bad decision by buying the book. The author made a bad decision by not writing a book I liked. And I can always just give that book to someone else who might like it. Feels like infomercials. I'm not sure what you're talking about now, but yeah. Manga seems to be like a big thing now. Yeah. The real money will be in owning data sets that aren't corrupted by AI, i.e. recursively training AI on AI outputs. This is going to be a problem, AI training itself. So it becomes very insular and unable to do much. And like that, the data set decays with AI input. And that's another problem that people have talked about with LLMs, large language models, is where do you get the data? Because if you're out of data and you don't have a ton of user feedback feeding into it, then they don't improve. And so you're kind of at a plateau. There are authors releasing their novels serially on sites like Royal Road to build an audience before repackaging it for Amazon. Yeah, you can do that. There's lots of strategies to try to do that. The question is there any site that's going to put readers onto your book without you having to do some other kind of clever way to get them there, like spending money or making really kind of viral content that gets people to view it, you know? I want to support Barnes & Noble, but every time I go there, it's so much rainbow propaganda. Yeah. Only book I regret getting and reading is Kite Runner. It's propaganda. What about audiobook market? Audible seems really saturated. It is now. So this was the thing 5 years ago. Everybody wanted to get into the audiobook market, and because it was growth. They're like, it's a growth market. And so this is the line goes up, people. It's like, you want to get in when the line's going up. But it takes a lot of resources to make an audiobook. So by the time you get in and put an audiobook out, it may be line is no longer going up. And so once 2020 happened and we had all the pandemic stuff, line not only not go up, line go down. Line go down a lot. And so people were like, why aren't you putting out more audiobooks? I love audiobooks. It's like, I like audiobooks too, man. But no one's buying them. So the extra hours, if it takes me 20 hours to record and edit an audiobook, which is not unheard of for a longer book, and some audiobooks are like 40 hours, right? If it's a really long book. So that time that I spend recording and editing it, I could just spend writing another book that's going to be more profitable. I'm not going to make as much on that audiobook as I would just writing another book. So it's not a great economic choice for me. I may still do them if I want to do them. I guess I could pay someone to do them, but then I have to worry about this. I have to worry about the ROI on that. And frankly, I just don't sell enough books to justify paying other people to do audiobooks. I've gone deeper into this about all the different audiobook arrangements don't make sense unless you are already basically in the top 1% of authors. It just doesn't make sense for you to make audiobooks financially. Audiobooks are always going to be a small portion. Even though each unit is more valuable, it's not going to be able to pay for a legitimately good narrator unless you already have a lot of book sales. And then, it'll be valuable. But for most people, that's not them. And so the profit sharing thing is just a way to steal value from narrators. And so I would never profit share with a narrator because I would just be victimizing him. So for my own peace of my soul, I will never profit share with a narrator on ACX or anything else. I'll just never do it. It just victimizes the narrator and gets him to do a bunch of free work for you. I'm not into that. Even if they're really good. Then if you have a big hit book, the profit sharing is just paying somebody perpetually for something that they didn't create. It should be a work for hire where they're fairly compensated for their work that they put in recording it. They get a good, fair compensation, and you are able to also profit on that, or at least break even. So for most people, audiobooks are just not a good investment. If you're doing really well, it can be a good investment, especially if you're going to get a deal on a narrator. But for most people, it's just not going to make you money. And especially when you're starting out, if you haven't really done a lot of writing and publishing yet, and you're thinking about audiobooks, just kind of put it in the back of your mind and say, I will evaluate this later once I get an understanding of how to sell books. Then I will commit to educating myself on how to make and sell audiobooks. So just put it on your like education queue for later, because it's just not going to be worth your time to worry about it when you're first starting out. You know. So anyway, that's my thing on audio. Yeah, the audiobook market, it's another line goes up. Nope, line does not always go up. Sorry. Lines sometimes go down, and that's what happened. The audiobook market crashed. It's a little better now, but it's not a thing that I would look to get into for financial reasons. It's just another revenue stream for a book, and I would only really consider it for really successful books right now. Barnes & Noble's also nothing but Legos and stuff, which I'm all for, but I miss the days when GameStop just sold games and Best Buy just sold DVDs. Yeah, the thing about Barnes & Noble too is like they're a huge portion of their sales are children's books, because children don't read ebooks and aren't interested in ebooks. And then if you go into the children's book section, you'll find that a lot of it is like graphic novels and manga, because people are willing to make comics for kids. Whereas the actual like American comic section is just, bombed and depleted. No one buys that crap anymore. Line go up is why so many AAA video games are releasing products that nobody wants. Yeah. The video game market will expand forever. I think, actually, by the way, Microsoft and Sony both know that line does not go up forever. And I think you can see that with the hardware for this generation as well as their business decisions. I don't think they're stupid. A lot of people come out, Microsoft is stupid, Sony is stupid. I don't think they're stupid. I think the guys that are running them have an idea of what's going on and are realizing what's happening with the video game market, namely that it's plateaued. So you have a plateau of the market itself, which means really that you can't expect to be making more and more money with higher and higher budgets. You have to figure out how to balance that out. So these big budget games that have happened over the last few years, I think they're going to have to pull that back. That's why you're seeing a lot of layoffs and stuff. It's like, we got to shrink these companies. We got to shrink the budgets, because we're just not going to make money. We have to figure out how to do more with less, and not worry about cinematic presentation as much as like really fun, addictive gameplay. And I think there's lots of examples to look at with that, like Genshin Impact. So Genshin Impact is definitely a big budget game, but it's made with a much smaller, tighter budget and has a bigger, more expansive game than a lot of American games will have. And its graphics are really beautiful without being intensive, if that makes sense. So rather than trying to make a photorealistic game with like hyper real textures, they kind of went with a cel shaded look and just made anime characters. And it's like, people love the style. Like, people will love aesthetic styles that are not realistic, as long as they look good and there's good music and the gameplay is really fun. And so Genshin Impact has all of that. Amazing soundtrack, really fun gameplay, great looking game to explore. It's not that hard to build. I haven't done this, but my understanding from like interacting with some devs, it's not that hard to build like a big world, believe it or not, right? Because you use assets and it's kind of like you have infinite Legos and you're just making a giant land, right? You have a rock and you just turn the rock 30 different ways to make different rocks. The problem is filling that land up with content, and if you have a really good gameplay loop, that can be done pretty efficiently, right? You just fill it full of monsters that the player has to kill, like an MMO. And then you have really good design, you have really good presentation. Your presentation's really good, your graphics are good, and then you figure out how am I going to make money from this? And they made money with, we're going to make really attractive characters that people will want to spend money to play with. It's like selling toys with gotchas, and that's the way they make their money. Anyway, so that plateaued. The increase in quality and fidelity of graphics also plateaued in ways that people who are enthusiasts will understand the graphical increases, but normies don't perceive them the way that I consider myself like a game enthusiast. And I know that some of you are. Let me tell you, normies don't perceive the increase in graphical quality the way you or I do. My wife will come in and be like, well, that game looks pretty, right? But it often, she'll say that about Wii U games. They run at 720p. So the aesthetic quality really reached a maturity around 2007 to 2008. Maybe let's say between 2007 and 2010, we had a maturity of the aesthetic quality in games. Yes, we could have better textures. But the increasing the number of polygons didn't make things look substantially better. Increasing the quality of textures made them look a little better. Increasing the resolution, did that make it look better? For a lot of people, no, because they still sit far away from their TV and they can't really perceive the sharpness of 4K. Their TVs are too small and they're too far away from them because that's how they've been trained to buy and look at TVs small. I'd say this, I have like a 48-inch monitor like right in front of my face. So when I play a game in 4K, I really freaking notice it's 4K. I'm really close to it. And I can tell the difference between 1080p and 4K because I'm very close to the monitor. Most people aren't. So game companies, right? Like, why buy a PS5 if the PS4 looks good enough? So there's a lot of consumers that just aren't interested. They're like, for $500, I just don't feel like I'm getting something that I really need, especially during a hard economic time. So I think the big gaming companies, Sony and Microsoft and Nintendo, understand that the way to make money is to sell software. That's why Microsoft started buying everything up, is they realized it's not about making a lot of money on hardware. A lot of people just don't have reason to buy new hardware, not just to buy the Series X or the Series S, but to buy a PS5. A lot of people are just not electing to buy the new hardware, which means it's all the more important to sell software and to just find the best platforms to sell software on, because we've reached like a saturation point for hardware purchases as well as increases in hardware quality. The Nintendo Switch was kind of anemic even when it came out with that. I think it's an NVIDIA Tegra X1 is the SoC it uses, and it was like a kind of okay phone. It's like a phone SoC really, in terms of its quality from like 2015. So people are still buying Nintendo Switches in 2024, and it's like mobile hardware from 2015. What does that mean? Like, when are they going to come out with the Switch 2? Do they need to? Eventually they probably will, because it's a way to sell an additional thing to everyone. But do you think they're just going to stop selling software on the Switch? They'll probably like cross-platform it. They did this with the PS3 and the PS4, cross-platform releases for almost everything for like 3 or 4 years, and they're continuing to do it on the PS5. We have cross-platform releases for almost everything now, like 4 years into it. We have PS4 and PS5. It'll come out on both, or people will just release it for PS4 and you can just play it on the PS5 and it's fine, right? If you're not going to use the features of the PS5, if you're doing like an indie game, there's actually no reason to make a PS5 game. You could just make it for PS4 and it'll just run on the PS5 like pretty much flawlessly. You know what I mean? So anyway. Yeah. They're conceived when the line's going up and then released when it's flatlined. So anyway, yeah, I think the companies know that, and that's why they're moving into like the publishing, like trying to control publishers, because that's where you're going to make your money, right? Is like, rather than taking a cut from a publisher, you just own the whole publisher. And so then you get all of the profit. You don't just get a cut for like pressing the disc or something. You get all of the profit. So it's just a way to increase your profit share for the totality of the industry. As the industry plateaus, the big boys are like, well, in order for us to keep making money, we really need to like control more of the market. Nintendo's approach is profitable not just because they sell cheap hardware at a profit, but really they have lots of software that makes you want to own that hardware. And they make all the money on the software too. And they never have sales. They never sell their own software. They never put it on sale. It's really rare to get a Nintendo game at a discount. I recently checked out the Children of the Children of Hurin by the late Christopher Lee. I really enjoyed it. That's my favorite Tolkien story, and Lee understood that material so well as a fan himself. It's a great audiobook. I've done a review of it. It's very good. Off topic. War Within cinematic trailers were terrible. IMO. No soul. Fascinating to watch an established property decay over time. Yeah, if we're talking about World of Warcraft, people, the World of Warcraft fanboys love to hate on my videos and stop by and say like, You're such a piece of crap for, I made this video that pointed this out. They came up with this plan like, here's our next 3 expansions. Cool, next 3 expansions. I'm like, so let's think about how they're going to space these out if they're telling the truth. You're going to pay, and I figured out the money was like $1,200 to $1,600 for 6 raids. Would you pay, because that's what everybody ends up doing, right? The truth is about World of Warcraft, everybody rushes to that end game where you're going to do the same raid for 6 months. If you're lucky, 6 months. If you're not lucky, 18 months of one raid. And that's the way Blizzard does it. And they realize that that's all they have to do is like come out with some daily grind quest stuff. Come out with a good raid. Make the raid good enough that people want to do it. And you do 2 raids and then you release another expansion and make everybody, you get the normies to buy the new expansion for $40 or $50, and then the subscription will just pay for your continued development from the people who want to do one raid for 6 to 9 months at a time. But that's what they do. And one of the reasons I liked vanilla raiding better, even though it was more simple, it wasn't as hard, especially with the earlier instances, is that the raids weren't, the raids didn't become useless immediately. Okay, so when Blackwing Lair came out, people were excited to do Blackwing Lair, but they were still doing Molten Core every week. They were still doing ZG, or when ZG came out, they didn't stop doing Blackwing Lair and Molten Core. They did ZG. You had all of these raids going, and when people were in Molten Core, they were still doing Blackrock Spire, BRD. They were still trying to get epics. They're still trying to get items out of those high-level dungeons. So if you were a player that like leveled up later into vanilla, you would look at all of the content and there'd really be no way to stop. You wouldn't be doing the same thing, right? There'd be huge amounts of different things to do. I'm going to do the Stratholme stuff, and then I'm going to do ZG, and I'm going to do AQ20, and I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do Molten Core, and then I got into a guild, and we're going to do we're farming Blackwing Lair, and then we're trying to push AQ40, and then we're going to do ZG run on Saturday. There was so much going on in vanilla, and there was such a diversity of stuff that you would do at max level. It just has no comparison to today. That's the thing people don't get, is like the whole thing is structured around, here's the current raid, here's 4 difficulties of the current raid. You start at 1 and work your way up through them, right? And if you have already done like your mythic garbage, maybe you start at normal or hard, and maybe you're in a great guild and you start at hard and you get up into like mythic raids. Great. You get to skip them, but like for people who maybe are leveling up later, it's like, oh, well, what raid is that? Oh, that raid, no one does it. You're never going to get a group for it because that's the raid from last year. This year's raid is whatever it is, and so you need to you're going to get your badges and buy your gear here, and then you're going to do Raid Finder and normal until you get enough gear for someone to let you do like a hard mode or get you into a guild, and then you're going to do that until maybe you can do a mythic. You're doing the same raid, and that's it. Like, and if you imagine somebody who's like raid logging just one raid for months, it's got to be boring, right? Now, that's like mythic raids are challenging. It's like most people are not doing mythic raids, and for them to even do mythic raids, it's not a skill issue. Right? It's a grind issue. It's a grind plus skill. Yes. Some people are not skilled enough to do mythic raids. Most people, in order to even have access to the mythic raids, they have to like grind up the gear level to not die instantly, to have enough DPS to do it, to like have enough healing to get through it, to make the tank have enough gear to not die immediately. Like it's really structured around the most boring concentration of things imaginable. That's what really makes it not fun to me. All the other stuff, players don't even care about. This was my point about like, why is writing in WoW so bad? It's because players don't give a shit about the writing. They have never read the quest text, other than the very first players back in 2004 and 2005. in vanilla, we read the quest text because you had to do that to figure out how to do the quest. There was no quest helper or any of that kind of crap. So there was way more interactivity with the world because of that. But since then, especially once they had quest helper, and then once they just put that in the UI, no one read quest text anymore. And this is also incidentally why Final Fantasy XIV is better in this regard as far as the story goes, is that because they don't give you a big wall, they don't give you like, here's the quest text in a box, which was very convenient for reading in 2004. They have the characters speak in dialogue boxes or in cutscenes that you tend to just read. You read. You have to click through it. Now, some people probably just like spamming it to get through it, but for the most part, you're actually interacting with the NPCs. You're experiencing a little story. You're learning about the world. So it feels deeper. It feels like a deeper experience in that regard. Whereas World of Warcraft, players didn't even notice that Chromie was turned into a transgender whatever. Why? Because they don't pay any attention. They're like, I am trying to go as fast as possible to get to the raid. The raid. You've got to get to the raid as quick as possible. I'm skipping the quest text. I'm going to go to the red circle on the map, and then I'm going to look around to see what I can click or what I have to kill, what's highlighted for me to kill. I'm going to right-click it, and then my add-ons are going to pop up which spells to press in which order. Yes, this is what people do in raids. This is why, it requires so much skill. It's like it requires a lot of freaking mods because that's what people do. They respond to a skill check with a mod that reduces the skill level required for it, almost universally. That's why deadly boss mods, like and then there's this reflexive thing where Blizzard will just design the encounter with deadly boss mods in mind. It's like, oh, well, someone's going to use deadly boss mods timers, so we should just, in order to keep it hard, we have to have 15 timers going on that people have to pay attention to. It would be impossible to actually do the encounter without deadly boss mods. So it's like, what do you do, right? So you just accept that that's what it is, and you design it with those limitations in mind. That to me doesn't make it hard. And I see people, it's like, here's my mods for mythic raiding, and then I see it, and they even have a mod that pulls up. It has a little highlight, like press this key, and then press this. It does their damage rotation for them. They never have to think about what spell to use next, right? They have zero thinking that has to be done. And so if you were to take that person who's like, oh yeah, I'm such a good warlock because my spell rotation pops up and it tells me exactly what's the ideal spell for me to click at this point. And then you put them in Final Fantasy XIV, like now you play Black Mage, and they'd be like, okay, what's my rotation? It's like, you have to decide that in the moment. You have to make decisions because like your astral fire is going away, and are you going to be able to quickly switch over to ice enough, to like umbral ice or whatever it is, right? Are you going to be able to do this quick enough? Are you going to be able to think about this quick enough to actually not suck at the job? And it's like, you have to pay attention to the UI elements. So you have to play the game rather than having a mod go jump out of the fire, right? That's deadly boss mods. So yeah, WoW raids can be really hard, but they're hard in a way that is just different from a regular game. This is why people are like, Dark Souls is so hard. I'm like, Dark Souls is not that hard. It's unforgiving, and there's a pattern. Like, you have to memorize the pattern of an enemy attack. And it's like, but how do I do that? It's like, you just have to pay attention to how it moves. For a WoW player that's used to like, jump out of this, click the cube, like they're used to deadly boss mods having timers everywhere to tell them what to do, that can seem really hard. And then for people who were used to playing God of War, they're like, yeah, this is challenging, but it's not like impossible, man. It's like, you just have to pay attention to the way that you have to pay attention to what people are doing. Pay attention to that guy pulling back his bow. He's about to shoot an arrow. How did I know? There was no like timer beeping at me, right? That's WoW. And to me, it's like, whenever I raid, I always go back for like an expansion. I shouldn't say I always have. I don't know if I will this time for like War Within. I probably won't, because I'm just so done with World of Warcraft. Like, I am playing Final Fantasy XIV again right now, but like, yeah, I'm just so done with World of Warcraft because of all these things. It's like, it never gets better. They never improve the experience. WoW reached a maturity where they were happy with it somewhere around Mists of Pandaria. And they've done virtually no improvement to the game since then. It's little things that don't matter that much. When you go back and you get the holistic experience of vanilla through early Wrath of the Lich King, it's just no comparison to the amount of fun that the game used to be and how interesting and immersive the world used to be compared to how it is now. They're never going to change it. They're never going to change what they're doing. They're never going to stop selling character boosts. They're never going to stop selling power. They're never going to stop resetting gear. They're never going to stop doing the 4 levels of difficulty in one raid that everybody does. They're never going to fix PvP. They're never going to fix any of it. They will never fix World of Warcraft. There's no reason to, right? Until they lose a whole shit ton of people, they're never going to fix it. And even then, they did come up with a fix, which is, well, we have Classic. And so everybody's playing Classic. And it's like, the people who wanted the game to be good can just go back and play Classic. The only problem is we already played Classic. So once we've done all the content, we're like, well, I've kind of done all this enough to where I'm ready to do something else. So, next time I revisit WoW and I'm like really wanting to play WoW, I'll probably play Classic again and just enjoy that experience for what it is. Yeah. The children of Hurin. Turin Turimbar. Why do authors, even good ones, tend to go downhill? Alistair MacLean comes to mind for me. Well, I think there's probably a lot of reasons why that may happen. I think of like Robert Jordan. So you can get into a situation where it becomes a business, and so you need to put out the product whether or not it's really high quality or really good. You can't do that lightning in a bottle thing multiple times. It's like, why did George Lucas go downhill? I'm like, I don't think he did go downhill. I think that, not everything can be the same quality and same popularity as the original Star Wars movie. It's kind of lightning in a bottle. It's the perfect time for the perfect product, and that's really hard to replicate. Even if you make something that's really high quality, really beautiful, really well produced, even well written, what does that matter if it's not as good? You're always going to be compared to your best output. So in a lot of cases, it's not them getting substantially worse. It's just you're always comparing them to the best version of them. And then, publishers can have an effect in that. You got to put out the next book, and it's just maybe not that good, or it's not willing to be edited right. That's kind of the Robert Jordan syndrome. Is his wife ended up editing it, and everybody lost track of what made the books good. You maybe lose track of what consumers liked about the original books. There's a lot of reasons why that may happen. It happens with bands too. Can you think of too many bands that like went uphill and just never stopped? Again, line go up, line go up, line also go down. Line must go up forever. It's like, I remember being disappointed by a Dragon Force record at one point. I don't remember which one it was. And I was like, they can't just keep impressing me forever. They can't just keep going. They can't keep going faster forever. They can't keep shredding harder than forever. They have to do something different. And eventually, I'm going to be disappointed. Same thing with like Blind Guardian. Did Blind Guardian get worse? No, they just came out with a couple albums that just I wasn't really interested in. That's all. They're not a bad band. They're awesome. Oh, they used to be great. Same thing with Metallica. Line go up, line also go down. I'm not super into what they're doing these days. That's all. At one point you've had, it's like from Trainspotting. At one point you have it, and then you lose it. You've got it, and then you lose it. Could the video game market crash already? I don't know if we're looking at a crash as a plateau. So a crash is a correction. Let's talk a little bit, maybe some economics can kind of elucidate what I'm thinking about here, or like my thoughts, is that crashes happen when there is a necessary market correction. What's a market correction? Well, that means that the trading value of a thing goes to where it really is. That's the real value. And at some point it was trading above the value that it really needed to be given what it does, given the value it produces. So if you have a stock that crashes, if the value of a stock crashes, that's the market realizing that the value of the company that it's producing and is likely to produce in the future is not as high as it was trading for, right? We call that a market correction. So, a housing bubble. Houses get expensive. The bubble pops. We have a crash. What's the crash? That's the inflated cost of the asset going down to a level at which people will actually buy it. And what happens is a stock crashes, home prices crash because people won't buy the item. So a video game crash would be people are not buying video games. There's a bunch. We made more and tried to sell them for more, and they didn't sell. So we have to sell them for less and less and less until we get to the appropriate amount, the appropriate dollar value. Now, this happened in the early 80s because they made lots of Atari games thinking that people would keep buying. It was probably this line goes up thing. So as line goes up, you're like, well, I need to make enough games for when the line is here rather than just here. And then the line did this, and it's like, uh-oh. So the crash is we made these games, and now we have to sell these games. Or in this case, it's like people bought fewer games. So as people buy fewer games, the value goes down even more. So what I think is probably happening with the video game industry is not people buying fewer games, but I think people not buying more games than they were before, and there's not more new people entering the market buying games. So that means it's a plateau, is that you end up with a saturated consumer base. All the people who are really interested in playing games have a console. They're not really interested in buying additional consoles or investing more money in more kinds of hardware. As a gaming enthusiast, it's easy to think, well, like, and I had this with what was the story I wrote? Jimmy turns 35. For him, the question was never what console I buy, but which one do I buy first? Because like you could buy all the consoles in the early 2000s, and each of them had a different game library. It was a real choice, and so people would buy multiple ones. People have a Wii and a PS3 and an Xbox 360. Now, I have a Nintendo Switch and I have a PS5. I don't have an Xbox Series X. Why? There's not a substantially different software library. I have a gaming PC. I have a Steam Deck. I have more hardware than I need. And that's because I'm like a mega gaming enthusiast. I love games and I love sharing them with people. But I'm not a normie. If I think about someone who's a little bit more of a normie, they have a Nintendo Switch. That's the only console they have. Or they have a PlayStation 4 still. And they still play games on it sometimes, right? So it's not that people are losing interest in games. I don't think that's happening. I think games are still really interesting to the youth. But there's not extra growth. And so when there's not extra growth, yeah, there may need to be a correction. But I don't think it'll be like a giant crash where all the value will fall out of it and nobody's buying any games anymore. So I don't think that'll happen. But I think the correction will be more like a soft, I don't want to call it like a soft landing, but like a correction that pulls things back down to where they need to be for future investment to occur. Part of any stock crash or any kind of crash of assets is you clear out toxic assets. You have a bunch of assets that people are holding on to, hoping for the value to go up for them to sell it. The value has to crash down to where they're forced to get rid of those toxic assets, and that devaluation allows for the next cycle of investment to occur, for people to buy the next round of capital goods to make the next set of things. They're no longer invested in the toxic asset. It frees up investment for other things. It's an important cycle. So I don't think it's going to be like a huge crash. I think we are definitely due for a correction of some kind, but I don't think it's going to be like the early 80s. I don't think it's going to be like a thing where like the companies are going to go bankrupt. I think they're already making, and I think we can look at the decisions for Sony and Microsoft and go like, I think things are not great. I think people are not like, why buy a new PS5 if they don't feel like it looks better? Do you know what I mean? Why buy a Series X if I don't feel like it looks better? Yeah. There's a lag effect with cheap entertainment. Once the masses consider even a $15 discount unaffordable, games will go down bigly, happening already. Big names like Bungie are burning. So I think Bungie's, I don't have all the details for Bungie, but like, why would Bungie, like, I think Sony bought them, right? So why would Sony buy them? Because one of their best-selling games is Destiny 2. I don't love Destiny. I never played Destiny 2. I played Destiny 1, and I was like, this. It's like an MMO, but antisocial. Not antisocial, but asocial. And I just didn't enjoy it very much. Though I thought the gameplay was solid. I'm a fan of Bungie's games traditionally. But they laid off a bunch of people. Why? It was because they were looking at the cost. Once they acquired the publishing thing and like have access to all the profits, they're like, it's just going to cost too much money to do the next round of this stuff. It's just not paying for itself. So we have to you got to lean up, and we have to figure out what we're going to do. And so that's a lot of that stuff. Like, why would Microsoft buy a company and then lay off half the people? It's to condense. It's because they bought it knowing that they need to own the software side in order to continue making money in a stagnant economy and a stagnant gaming market. But the companies are too big and their budgets are too high. So that has to be corrected as well. I think they see the writing on the wall that, like, we're not going to be able to, first of all, $70 games, people may not be willing to buy $70 games. They may not see a value in it, especially a game like God of War or Spider-Man that's very cinematic but doesn't offer a long-term experience. Turns out the cheaper games like Fortnite offer a much better long-term experience for people. Or Genshin Impact, which is free to play, offers this long-term experience for players to play and continue making money versus like a $70 cinematic, super high budget movie game. That, I think, was the aspirational belief of people who were working on like PS3 games. You know, they wanted these like cinematic big experiences. And once you achieve that, you realize that consumers, turns out they're choosing different experiences. And this is let me figure out how to put this into like appropriate words. God of War Ragnarok is an impressive experience. But it is not a deep experience. It is a shallow experience. Gamers like games because it's a deeper experience than a movie. What they don't want is an interactive movie. An interactive movie is not what gamers are interested in because it's not deep. That's shallow. So things like God of War Ragnarok, they have gameplay, but the gameplay is very shallow compared to even something like Dark Souls, or really shallow compared to the original God of War trilogy games. Way more shallow. There's a lot more stuff going on in an original God of War game. It's a lot harder. You can die more easily. That produces a deeper experience. I have to master the controls. I have to think about how I'm going to overcome a puzzle or a challenge. The person's really engaged with the game in an action game like God of War. And God of War Ragnarok, it's more like that's just the surface, and you never get the deeper thing. You just never get the deeper experience that you would get with, like, why do people love Dark Souls? It's a deep experience. And they will even project depth on it that doesn't exist with Demon Souls and Dark Souls. They're like, oh, here's this, this dragon at the bottom of the castle, and I wonder what this means. And they're asking all these questions. It's like the developers may not have really thought that deeply about it. The reason it's deep is because it's difficult to progress through, and you get little rewards for finding lots of things. Like exploring produces rewards, which itself lends it a deeper feeling. So I think if these companies want to continue making money, they're going to have to figure out how to make the experiences deeper rather than just more fidelitous, I guess, more graphical. They're not even more aesthetically pleasing, right? Aesthetics can be pleasing on a Super Nintendo. And many Super Nintendo games are more aesthetically pleasing than modern games. So you're going to have to figure out. Destiny 2, I think, looking at that, it's like that's a deep experience game. It's a deep experience game. Not to mention they make junk no one wants because of woke HR creative capture. Now that is something that can definitely be part of a correction. Is if people aren't buying the woke game, then the company that makes it is going to go out of business. That's a kind of correction. That's not a market correction unless it's like the whole market decided it was going to do like homosexual games and no one bought them. And then the industry would crash. We're not quite at that level. It's more like there's a lot of individual companies that make homosexual games and then not that many people are buying them. And so there is an effect on the market, you know. What do you think about comic book shops? I think they're full of gross nerds. Okay, I don't hate comic book shops. That's a bit of a joke, but go to a comic shop and see what is selling. Chances are it's not comics. Chances are the guy's keeping the lights on by selling Warhammer and paint. You know, it's a paint shop. That's how you make your money with Warhammer figurines, by the way, is you sell the paint. They're making their money selling something else, selling manga, right? There's, you know, American comics is so dead. And the comic shop is one of the reasons that it's dead, is that American comics moved off the spinner rack. Once they moved out of like Lucky drugstores and out of Rite Aid, they were down. They were doomed. They were going from a mainstream periodical to a specialist niche product, and they never recovered. In fact, I know Marvel went bankrupt in 1997. I think DC might have as well. Point is that it's really bad. And so the people that were really interested in comic books are just, you know, comic nerds. So that's what you get at a comic book shop, or you did for a while. Now a comic book shop is people coming in to get Warhammer stuff and then just not even attending to the comics at all. I don't hardly even game at all anymore. I have kids and stuff, and gaming just doesn't make the cut 99% of the time. I game, but I don't game as much as I used to. For sure. Brenda Williamson doesn't sell many books so far, despite good reviews, but she has already gotten an audiobook production company to make a full cast audio production of her first Morona Grant book. It's all relative, right? Are they going to make? They may make no money on it, and then that's bad too. My older brother said like 15 years ago, I'm just maxed out on the whole thing regarding video games. Yeah. Probably within 12 months. The new Metroid Prime didn't specify the platform. I didn't think Switch hardware is even older than that, if I recall correctly. The hardware for it was around for a long time, even at that point. Yeah, I thought it was 2015. I could be wrong. The point is, it's like a mobile chipset that's old now, like 10 years old. And it wasn't even good when it was released. But the point is, newer hardware is not producing better experiences and even more pleasing graphical experiences, which is why people are willing to buy the Switch. It's more important that it's portable. It looks good enough on the TV. It's good enough. So for a lot of consumers, good enough is good enough. They don't need 4K ray tracing. They don't know what the hell ray tracing is. They don't give a shit about it. You put on, here's ray tracing and here's like standard rendering. They're like, I don't know what the difference is. What am I looking for? I don't understand. And it's like, that one is moving faster so it looks better. Now that's real. People like, you know, a normie can detect the higher frame rates for sure. So the better frame rates do matter. But even then, they're like, it doesn't look that much better. I don't really need this. Decide to make software your selling point, but hire a bunch of libs to produce crap no one wants. What is this business strategy called? It's called knowing the market, but not hiring the right people. I don't know. On this topic, why is it so common for fan bases to be so argumentative and hostile? Oh, it's because they have an internal identity attached to the property in question. So Star Wars fans, they basically have a religious, attachment. It's like a religious sentiment. They have a self-identity bound up with being a Star Wars fan. And so if you say something bad about Star Wars, they get personally offended about that. You know what I mean? They get upset. Or they get upset that you like something they don't like. It's the same idea. So they feel like you're attacking them as a person. It's an inability to, not just an inability to discern between individuals and groups, but between the self and what the self likes. This is something that my generation grew up with, is like, you are a metalhead, you are a skater, you are this. Like all these little subcultural identities that are completely meaningless and don't define the self at all become internalized. I am a Star Wars fan. That's who I am. No, that's not who you are. Who you are is what you do, right? You're a person that has seen some Star Wars movies. It's not really a thing you do, right? Do you cook dinner for your kids? You're a dad. Okay, that's more appropriate. But that's why it's a personal identity thing. And so when you say something negative, then that's perceived as an attack on the self. Yeah, people get super upset about WoW. If you say anything bad about WoW, because they spend all their time playing WoW, and if somebody points, and usually it's them getting angry that you're right. It's them getting really angry that you're correct about something. Right? If I point out that the WoW rating experience is, as a holistic thing, basically shit, they're like, oh, well, you're not doing mythic raids. It's like, I don't want to spend 20 hours a week grinding the same raid for months to then have enough gear to do a mythic raid to prove that I know how to do a mythic raid. Right? I don't need to do that. Like, that's a complete waste of my time. For most people, they just get bored long before that point. They get bored of people not being good enough to get through hard mode, and they just quit the game, or they go do something else, and it's fine. That's fine. Great. That's like saying, here's this $500 million game that's made for 2,000 total people to do one extremely difficult mode, and that's what matters. No, I think the world of Warcraft is what should matter, and the Mythic Raid should be there for the people who are like, I really want an extreme challenge. And I would even make the rewards just like, like titles and aesthetic things like transmogs, and that would probably be enough to like encourage people. People want to get like Merciless Gladiator or whatever because it's a title that shows that they're badass. The gear, you could get better gear. The gear is good, but you could get the gear without getting the title. I used to play Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos when I was 12, and the dialogue was like Lord of the Rings with no soul. Yeah, I don't think it's great, but it's okay. Whereas like modern WoW, the dialogue is so cringe, but it just explains nothing. It's people shouting their feelings at each other while explaining nothing of the conflict. Like no exposition. There's no exposition. And then you read quest text and you realize that you're watching a cutscene of two gay centaurs getting an approval from their ancestor ghost to go have gay anal centaur sex with each other, right? Like, it's stupid. But people were probably not even watching that. They're probably running back to turn in the quest and not watching the stupid dialogue. Final Fantasy XIV does a decent job at having things to do besides raiding. A majority of the player base doesn't touch the difficult content, and that's fine. And that's ideal, right? In vanilla, most people didn't do Naxxramas for lots of reasons. It was hard to get into. You had to do this long attunement, but you had to have really good gear to be successful in Naxxramas. To get past patchwork required your whole raid to be geared out. Because it was just a DPS check. It wasn't like you need to be super skilled. Everybody had to have good gear and know their rotation. And rotations in vanilla were not hard. Hunter rotation was auto shot. Like you could get top DPS with like auto shot. That's awful. I played Hunter, so I tried to like get extra DPS, but like weaving aim shot and stuff, but. This is a totally non-controversial take, but I always recommend the graphic novel The Dark Knight Returns. Yeah, it's actually good, but that's old. That stuff is like more than 30 years old now, isn't it? Yeah. Don't worry about canon. That's another thing. Canon is stupid. There's no point worrying about canon when you've had 50 writers writing the same character for 90 years. Just don't worry about canon. Just find the good stories and read those. Canon is really dumb to think about with Batman or anything with comic books. The idea of somebody deciding on this canon or retconning or what, it's just dumb. Write good stuff right now and read the good stuff. And don't worry about that. I think it's silly to worry too much about canon. Just read good stories. Speaking of video games, I'm interested to see what will happen now that so many live service games are failing, costing companies millions. Same with these massive AAA games that have failed. So a lot of them, there's a lot to dig into with that comment, right? A lot of live service games are not failing, but you've reached a saturation point. The reason live service games are so attractive is that you can make money, continue making money over time by like nickel and diming the customer. The problem with live service games is that sooner or later, line eventually go down. So sooner or later, the money is not going to be there to continue supporting the game. And then what do you do with it? You can't just lose money by keeping the service alive, so you have to kill it. We've already seen this with mobile gaming. I remember when I was streaming Final Fantasy 15, we were rolling around in the car and it had Terra Battle decals on it. What was Terra Battle? Terra Battle was a mobile game put out by Square Enix in the mid 2000s, and that's what they're like. That's the game that they're like playing on their phones while they sit around with Coleman lanterns and eat cup noodles in Final Fantasy 15. You can't play that game anymore. It's impossible. Might have been a cool game. I never really played it. But now you don't get to play it because it was dependent on continual revenue. You're selling it up as a service. And as soon as demand for that service goes down, the game has to go away. I think the big problem is trying to sell games as service, games that shouldn't be as service. DLC, always online DRM, garbage, right? These are things that nobody asked for or wanted. The company put them in there in hopes to force people to spend extra money on it or really encourage them to spend extra money on it, This was a thing too. Not all live service games are failing. Genshin Impact's doing okay. MiHoYo's doing okay. If one of those games goes bad, they can kill it, and they'll probably have another game that's popular. Do you know what I mean? And realistically, if you're a game company, is there a reason to make a piece of software that you sell once? There are reasons, because you can sell it on new platforms for a long time, but your main sales are going to be like when the game comes out. So if you make a service game that can make a lot of money when it comes out, and you can pull the plug when it starts to be unpopular, that just kind of flows the natural interest of people. Like, people are really interested in it, they enjoy the game, they become less interested, you pull out. Because there's no reason to keep that up and worry about something you already did. Then you do the next thing. So it kind of goes along with the actual interest for a games as service game. I don't like games as service from an artistic perspective, because I think people should be able to buy games 10 years from now and enjoy them, right? Why not? The video game market already crashed at least once in 1983. Back then, people thought video games might be done. Can you imagine? Yep. That's why it's called the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, and not the Famicom, the family computer, is because they had to get it into stores as not a video game, because retailers were really apprehensive about trying to sell video games because no one was buying them. So they kind of got it in. That's like Rob the Robot was designed so the thing wouldn't look too much like a video game. And that's why there wasn't any software for Rob the Robot. There was like 2 games, I think. There's like Gyromite and Stack Up. Those are the only games you had, because the whole point of Rob the Robot was to sell the system in like 1985 and then 1986. And then otherwise, once people were buying video games again, you didn't need Rob the Robot. And no one really cared about it. People wanted, the light gun. There were some light gun games. I think I had 2. Duck Hunt, which came with it, and Gotcha. But it was really just about the core games. My son had a lot of Marvel on his kid's Kindle, and he thinks DC is uncool. Would love to prove him wrong, because I think there are some cool stories there. There's a lot of bad Marvel stories too. I don't see anything going up for a while. A whole lot of Globe has been in a bubble. Yeah. People are like, we got to, imagine making like a game like God of War Ragnarok, and they're like, well, we need to go 50 million more for the next game. Make it even bigger. It's like, line don't always go up, partner. The gaming industry is too big to fail. It almost died before because it was in its infancy. Not anymore. I would say for too big to fail is that there's enough big corporations with deep pockets and valuable assets that they can float market dips and adjust and get out of them. We might need a good correction to go from like bloated AAA budgets down to AA budgets and smaller teams. Everybody is like decrying the layoffs at various kinds of development studios, but we kind of forget how many people actually made games in like the 90s and 2000s. It wasn't that many. The original Bungie software team was pretty small, and it was like a little cozy family that made games. Yeah, software is more complex. Art is more complex. Things are harder to do now, but maybe we shouldn't be spending all of our resources on the art. I don't feel like PS2 games are worse because their graphical fidelity is worse. Or maybe we could split the difference. We just have graphical fidelity that's somewhere in the range of a lot of PS3 games, PS4 games, and we don't need too much more than that. Like, I was playing this game that I got on sale called Trinity Trigger. It's just a fun little RPG. It's kind of like Chrono Trigger, right? The graphics aren't particularly good. Doesn't matter. They're colorful enough. They show you what you need to see. The art's good enough. The character portraits look good. It's fine. You don't need like, even Diablo 4 doesn't really have good graphics to me, but you don't need that level of detail for it. You just don't. Like, it doesn't make the game better. I don't see the government sweeping in to bail out the gaming industry. No, they're not going to. But I think they're big enough with enough assets that they can float a market correction. Especially if the market correction is kind of soft. Like, it's not like everyone stopped buying games. Everyone stopped playing games. Because that's what happened in the 80s. Is like, people just stopped buying and playing games, or they were only playing the games that they already bought. Like in 1980. They were not buying any new games. I don't really see that happening. Another problem, this is another issue, is that games got longer and bigger. So, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is like a 50-hour game. Okay? That's the equivalent of like a lot of games in the 1990s. That's like 3 Final Fantasy IVs. So if your time is being taken up by longer games, you're going to buy fewer games. Makes sense to me. Versus if you're coming out with a lot of stuff like Need for Speed that like is really fun for a certain amount of time, and then you're really excited to play Madden 2004. Do you know what I mean? It's probably better. Oh, you're playing First Descent and it's free to play. It came out last month and I already got more than 100 hours in. Wow, that's a lot. I know you're not wrong about comic shops or Warhammer. Well, it's what I see. I just point out what I see. I know a lot of hardcore people will frown upon that, but so what? Oh yeah, looking up little guides. Like, you can get a guidebook for Batman. Yeah, or you can look up the wiki, the fan wiki. All that's fine. Why would you frown on that? Oh, you didn't gain the knowledge by reading every book. It's like, well, I don't have time to read every book, including the books that were bad that you had time to read in 1997. I want to read this book now, and it's referencing something that I don't know about, so I'm going to look it up. I think that's great. I should really do a wiki for all of my stuff, because especially my fantasy stuff has grown into this hydra where like, oh yeah, I'm constantly referencing things from like different books that you may not have read that take place in different times, and this one takes place like after the sun exploded, and like, what are you doing? Well, as opposed to manga, which can be found at places like 7-Eleven and other convenience stores in Japan. It's a staple of everyday life. American comics are a niche here. American comics used to be a staple. You used to be in the checkout at Rite Aid and you're like, Mom, there's a Superman comic, and she'd just buy you the Superman comic, and you would have an adventure. You would read an adventure of Superman or Spider-Man, right? Or X-Men or whatever. Those titles used to sell 1 million books a month, man. They purposefully took comics away from normies. Like nerds took comics, so they took over the industry in the early 90s. They purposefully took the books away from normies and made them a niche product, and we've been suffering that ever since. There have been some really cool board game stores that have sprung up in my city. I have one around the corner. It's like a church for Wiccans. Yeah, there's weird. Some people who are mega into board gaming, I think, can be kind of weird, but that's their hobby. That's the way that they connect with other people. I'm not going to judge them too harshly just because they're a little bit different. If that's what you're into, like you can go to a gun store and see guys that just wear camouflage all the time. Like that's their regular shirt, is like the mossy oak shirt. I have a mossy oak shirt, and my wife like hates it when I wear it. She's like, "You look like trash." Because there's these guys who just wear camo all day for no reason. I don't know why they're wearing camo, but that's just their thing. It's like, that's weird. It's like the dude just likes to wear mossy oak clothes. Thank you for saying what you did about comic shops and the spinner racks. That was about to be my next comment. It's the truth. Comics used to be mainstream youth culture in America. Yeah. I made a video about this that got some attention on some other comic channels. Like, comics in the 90s got taken away from the normal people and turned into a niche nerd kind of subculture. And the sales cratered. Marvel went bankrupt in 1997 because of that change, because of that changeover, ultimately losing Jim Shooter's vision for how to make a highly profitable company. They kept a bunch of the things that Jim Shooter did in the 80s, like having high talent and stuff like that. But then they completely abandoned trying to like write to market. And so you have a big company that stops writing to market. We don't even need to get into like the Spider-Man clone saga and how that like cratered the brand. But eventually they ended up bankrupt. Yeah. Ray tracing is mostly trash. It's cool, but most people aren't going to think it's special. It's like, again, it's a nerdy thing. Like nerds, people who are really nerdily into games, including me, are like, yeah, ray tracing's cool. Like ray tracing Doom looks very cool. But normies don't care. It doesn't matter to them. That's not something they care about. If you don't have a religion, media franchises can easily take their place. I see that a lot. Sounds ridiculous, but true. Doesn't truly fill the void, though. Comic nerds, Star Wars nerds, like being an extreme nerd about some thing, it's like an identity. Or it's the same thing, like, I'm a metalhead. Here, I have a Camelot shirt on. I'm such a metalhead. I love metal. And it's true, I do love heavy metal, right? But for me to internalize the identity of metalhead, and I have long hair, right? I look like a metalhead, like my identity is metalhead. Think about that. It's like, am I a thing because I like a thing? Is that really something I should internalize too much? I am a metalhead because I like to listen to Camelot? Well, I like listening to Camelot. Despite the imagery, it's Christmas. All power metal is Christmas and Halloween. Gamma Ray, Halloween. Right? Dragon Force, Christmas. Twilight Force, Christmas. Powerwolf, Halloween. Yeah, Star Wars fans are the best example of material occultism. Just bizarre how fanatical they are. And that's why they keep watching things they hate. They will never stop watching Star Wars. They will never stop. It will never happen. I've completely given up on convincing those guys. The guys who are still watching, it's like, why aren't you watching Andor? Because I don't watch Star Wars. It's made by people who hate me, and I know that there's a 95% chance it's going to suck. I would watch Andor, but I don't give a crap about it. So you telling me it's good is not a vote of confidence. So a person who will never stop watching Star Wars telling me that Andor is good, that doesn't make me think that it is at all likely to be good. At all. It's not a vote of confidence, because that same person will tell me Star Wars Rebels is good. The same person will be like, Clone Wars Season 5 was the best, or whatever. I'll be like, it's garbage. Another reason I could think of that people are so hostile and argumentative about fan bases, but I won't mention it here. I don't want to throw a Molotov cocktail. Yeah, well, I don't know. You can. WoW is about family, and that's what's so powerful about it. WoW was a place where you could make real friends once upon a time. Now it's a place where you make enemies, and where you have to pretend to be, woke, or you get in trouble. You can get banned. Elder Scrolls has really horrible dialogue too. That's why I kind of like Morrowind. It doesn't have dialogue. They just kind of talk to you in a big block. I tried to make a comedic RPG based on living in a small town and finding weapons at random thrift stores. That's a good one. Man, we got a lot of pawn shops in Houston, and I really want to hit them up when I have like some money to buy a guitar or something like that. Because I love finding cool older instruments in pawn shops. There's a lot of cool guitars you can find. I understand him though. A lot of people are intimidated by the sheer volume of content. 80 to 90 years of monthlies. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a lot. It scares people off before they get into it. That's why I say don't worry about canon. Man, don't worry about having to read it in a certain order. You know, just find the story that you think is cool. Find a 6th issue that someone says is good and read it. It's not that complicated to figure out Batman. Like he doesn't have mega complicated lore, even if you're getting deep into it, right? You figure out what you need to for the story in general. What I don't understand about gaming is why the budgets are blowing up when the technology should support smaller staff. I believe it's called Parkinson's Law. Is work stretches to fill available time. So if you have a $150 million budget, you're just going to use that budget. Work will expand to use $150 million. Elon Musk figured this out with Twitter too, which is like he cut like 70% of Twitter staff and the site got better. How did that happen? Well, obviously the 70% of the staff that he cut weren't really doing things that contributed to the product. They were doing shallow tasks that didn't really improve it. They were responding to emails. They were monitoring communities. They were getting coffee for people, like lots of little things that don't matter. Do you know what I mean? For me, when it comes to comics, it's generally best to start with the original Golden Age or Silver Age versions. The original is the definitive in most instances, especially for Superman. I can definitely see a great amount of wisdom in that. If you're interested in Spider-Man or a lot of the Marvel stuff, you can find like the Spider-Man Epic collections, which is going to be a lot of the stuff with it's going to be all in order. It's all the floppies based, and it's the size of a floppy, so you're not getting like a little Tankobon like mini one like they did that for a while with like Superman stuff in the 90s. Anyway, it'll be the size of the originals. Won't be on newsprint, so it won't look that authentic, but it will look pretty good on magazine print. And it'll have a certain span of years collected into one volume. So you can start with the actual Steve Ditko stuff and go forward from there to like the Romero stuff, whatever you want to do. It's a great place to start. But a lot of people don't like this. It'll happen. Like if you go look at the original Spider-Man stuff, chances are a modern reader is not going to like the storytelling style that Stan Lee was using in the 1960s. And that's because he was selling a lot of one-off issues on spinner racks. You didn't know if somebody was going to read the previous week. So you had to tell a complete story in 15 pages. And sometimes it's extremely fast-paced to the point where like it's almost ridiculous and cringeworthy. There's a really early Spider-Man one where he like goes in and catches a space capsule with his webs. Like it's ridiculous. But Stanley was like, we got to do this story. It's got to be 15 pages. We got to get it out. Let's just do it. Suicide Squad. Gyromite was for Rob. Yes, Gyromite. Now, my friend had Gyromite, but we didn't have Rob the Robot. So we had no idea what to do with this Gyromite game. So we had second player like lowering and opening the pipes and another person walking through. And we're like, this is really dumb. Why would you do this? This is like the worst 2-player game ever. We didn't realize that there was like a robot that was supposed to like press the pipes up and down. They always decry the layoffs. What do they want? To force the companies to keep the employees. That would go over really well. Well, how are they going to... So... sometimes you have to endure losses and not lose employees. Nintendo has proven that they weren't not laying off employees was a good decision for them. But in a lot of like woke companies, it's like, hey, you get to take over Naughty Dog. I'm like, 80% of you are fired now. And I could just do it at random. I'd be like, everybody, we're just going to do a lottery. 80% of you are going now. And it would probably improve the company, you know, versus spending time thinking about who you're going to fire or not. When you look at the teams that made games like Morrowind, you just have to think teams aren't pushing as hard as they used to. The technology is also more complicated. So I don't want to say they're not pushing as hard as they used to. A lot of developers are really super overworked. And that's the Pareto distribution is probably part of that. 20% of the people are doing all the work, and they're working really hard. But, you know, games are more graphically complex. The engines have more going on, at least, you know, the ones that I've tried to use versus older stuff. So there's a lot of times there's more work to be done. The art is more complicated. There's more polygons. There's more textures to make, right? There's a lot more to do in a lot of cases. And then there may be support stuff that costs more resources now versus how it used to be. I don't think it's like inevitable that you must have big teams at all. If it's probably better if you have small teams and just, you know, work within that. As long as they can all get their short-term cash loans needed to float these dips by keeping their AHG stores scores up. Yeah. Yeah, we forget that BlackRock and Vanguard keep giving out all this cheap capital because the only place people can stash their money now is the market. This is like an issue with inflation too. It's like people are desperate to buy stocks to just reduce losing their money in a bank, like losing the value of their money. Xbox One graphics were enough. I think Xbox 360 graphics were enough. I'm going to go one further. How bad is Dragon Age 4 going to be? Well, they've never made a really good Dragon Age game after the first one. So the first one was top 10 game of all time. The second one was, it was okay. There were some good moments, I guess. The third one was a bad single-player MMO with a terrible story, but it looked pretty. Wasn't good, though. Which one was worse, Dragon Age 2 or Dragon Age Inquisition? I can't really say. Dragon Age Inquisition legitimately bored me, though. I got very bored playing that game, whereas I never got bored playing Dragon Age 2, even when it wasn't good or when it was cringy or you had that elf with the stupid tattoos. I never got bored playing Dragon Age 2. Dragon Age Inquisition was just straight up boring. As someone in the tech industry, games are more complex. It's probably worse. There's a fundamental dearth of people who have a deep understanding of the technology. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. There's different drive on what to build and why when you understand the deep workings of what's being built. Yeah. My father-in-law is an OG programmer and he decries the coding from younger people. Ray tracing wrecks most artistic styles. Now that's an interesting comment. I can't say for sure or not. Ray tracing, let me think about that, because I think realism doesn't always play to good aesthetics. I'll put it that way. It's just because something is more realistic or the lighting is more like what it is in real life, I don't believe that makes an aesthetic better. So starting from that, like if you compare a photograph to a Thomas Kinkade painting, people love to shit on Thomas Kinkade, but I'm just using him as an example, right? The light doesn't look real, but it looks beautiful. It looks aesthetic. So maybe games have the same thing. Ray tracing will make something look real, but it won't make it look beautiful, right? Like you're looking at an image of me with a light shining on my face. Would I look better if a painter painted me? A highly skilled painter painted me, would I look better? Chances are I would. The painter would pick out certain details to emphasize, maybe fuzz out other ones that just aren't necessary, fill in the details that are missing maybe in shadows, soften the shadows, just paint a more beautiful picture of me. So yeah, I can see that ray tracing could actually wreck artistic styles. It's not necessary for most things. The crazy thing is, normies don't really see what's happening there. You can show it to them and they're like, I guess that one looks a little different, but I don't really know what's going on. Toys R Us used to sell like 8 comics in a clamshell pack. The comics weren't really worth anything, but I thought it was a great way to get kids into reading comics. Yeah, stuff like that. I bought Ninja Turtle comics at Toys R Us. Comics are easy to read. I was once a huge Star Wars fan, but I quit watching years ago and don't really care anymore. That's the way it should be with most things, right? It's crazy how long games take to create today. We used to get entire trilogies of games in the times that it takes to make one game. We got 3 Mass Effect games in 5 years. Yeah. Well, even before then, like, I think Marathon 1, which is a Bungie game, came out in 1994. And the third Marathon game, I think, came out in 1996. I'm going to look it up. When did Marathon Infinity come out? October 15th, 1996. I keep getting ads on my music. Yeah, October 15th, 1996. And Marathon came out December 21st, 1994. Less than 2 years to make 3 games. That's Bungie software. EFAP has reviewed and trashed all of the Disney Star Wars except Andor. It's the exception. They should never have reviewed any of them. Why are they still reviewing them if they're so bad? You know, Andor should have bombed because the whole franchise should be bombing. It has a lot to do with managerial capture of the companies. They have a lot more people than ever, which requires more paper pushing than ever. Yes, as you increase the size of a bureaucracy, you lower its efficiency tremendously. I think this is another one of those bureaucratic laws like Parkinson's law, which is like you increase the number of people. It's kind of like diminishing returns, but it's worse in a bureaucracy where, you know, if we have a team of 4 guys and we can all talk to each other in our little 4 offices, we add 1 extra person, that's 1 extra person to talk to about everything we're doing. And so that actually diminishes the amount of deep work you do in a day by making you talk to that extra person. And you multiply that by a bunch, where if you had a programmer in 1999 who was only having to do 2 conversations a day, suddenly he's having to do 8, 10, 12 conversations a day with emails. He's constantly having to respond to people. It takes his time away from his real work of programming, but it also forces him out of the headspace he needs to be in to actually do that work correctly, right? His focus is in a million different places. He as an individual ends up working far less efficiently because of the bureaucracy that requires his attention. Bureaucracies rob time from workers tremendously. And I experienced this hugely in academia, is that so this is a really interesting thing. When I started, let's start with when I was a student. I started college in 2001. And tuition was like $580 a semester for a major state university. By the time I graduated, it was like almost $2,000 a semester 4 years later. So the price increased by 4. Now, what did you get with that quadrupling of the price? You got 0 extra teachers, and in fact, they instituted a faculty early retirement program to pay out tenure track teachers And then anytime a tenure track teacher would retire, they replace him with 2 adjunct teachers. So there was no extra classes offered. They increased the number of students by about 30%, but didn't offer any more classes, really. But the number of administrative positions went up tremendously. And people think of administration, they think of like, oh, the university president. Well, it's him, got extra secretaries, dean secretaries, vice deans, but office staff. So you start gaining all kinds of office staff. They have to build extra buildings to hold all the office staff. When you used to call it the Joy Owl Loop, whenever you needed to do something in the administration building was the biggest one on campus. You would have to talk to 20 different people. You had to clear out your whole day in order to get something done in the administration building, because like your payment didn't go through. So you'd have to first talk to a cashier. You'd have to take that to another person. They'd send you to another person. They'd send you to another person. If you had financial aid involved, you'd have to talk to 5 or 6 different people. Then they'd probably send you back to the cashier with some other note, and then maybe you could get not kicked out of your classes because of a clerical error that happened somewhere in this trash can bureaucracy. I had like 3 or 4 times I actually was disenrolled. Like I was dropped from classes because my financial aid didn't go through. My financial aid was scholarships from the university. Those did not get paid. Or it's like, well, they got paid into your account, but we didn't pay your tuition with them. So you have a $1,200. I remember one time they didn't pay my tuition. Instead, they cut me a check for $1,200. And so I had to take that $1,200 check, deposit it, then go back, then pay my tuition. Right? Now, and this was the thing, is the tuition was due in like August 1st, and the check, they didn't cut me a check until like September 30th. So for 2 months, my scholarship that was supposed to pay 100% of my tuition was just nowhere. And no matter how many people you talk to, they're like, we issued a check on this day, so I can't help you. You have to talk to this person. It's like, holy crap. That was when I was a student. Once I was faculty, you realize it was like 1,000 times worse than you ever thought. You can't get anything done. You have to fill out 50 pages of documents every semester for no reason. No one reads them. It's like a 50-page self-evaluation. They just throw it in the garbage. They just make you fill out papers so that some secretary somewhere can make $37,000 a year reading your papers, working 4 hours a week or something, right? I've worked with banks, which are apex of this bureaucratic nightmare. They take years to launch a single new email campaign. Yeah. Batman, even at its best, is not Tolstoy. Yeah, we don't need it to be. We just need cool, fun adventures. That's what Batman should be. It's fun, mysteries, him being a detective, cool adventures, and like some drama to keep it interesting. You know what I'm saying? Those who watch all Star Wars content aren't very common. Andor was well liked by those who saw it, but didn't have a huge viewer base. Only a tiny percentage of Disney Plus viewers watched The Acolyte. Yeah, I've read that. They're like, but people in Disneyland, when I went to Disneyland, were walking around with Acolyte shirts on all over the place. So I don't know how that distribution works, but those people were showing up to Disneyland. I read Japan is extremely reluctant to release employees. I've heard that as well, that people have to like hire other companies to help them quit their job. There's companies that specialize in quitting your job for you. I get mixed messages on if they pressure them to quit via other means. Inquisition was much worse than Dragon Age 2. I never finished it. Yes, I left the Hinterlands. The Hinterlands were really boring. I really hated that mission table. I'm like, all right, let's do the next area. It's like, come back in 10 hours. I'm like, is there a cheat code for this? Why should I have to wait for this? And that the World of Warcraft had the mission table at the exact same time. It was bad. 2015 was a bad year for games. My guess is that they aren't sure how to improve the games from the design level. Graphical improvements are an objective way to sell new games. Great point. Graphics do sell games. I agree. Whereas like the functionality, the fun of the game, it's hard to quantify that. And you know, we have a mature technology, a mature market. We're not going to be coming up with crazy new game ideas. That's why I like visual novels, and why I really need to do one, is that the emphasis is just on the story, and you can do a new story every time and make it pretty unique and pretty fun. You know what I mean? I wish they'd go back to hardcore serial killer games like Manhunt and Condemned Criminal Origins. I think that's a fun idea. Or Postal. I'm not into ray tracing, but I love HDR and double vision. I noticed the difference between HBR. or HDR and stuff, right? HDR10 and Dolby Vision. I can notice the difference on that, but I have an HDR capable display. So trying to explain HDR to a normie, it's like they're just not really going to get it. It's maybe something that just kind of slowly becomes standard over time, or like cinephiles are going to care about it. You actually can't compare HDR content. And I've seen YouTube's is like, here's the HDR version of Lord of the Rings, and here's this, and they're like, HDR version looks worse. It's like, you guys aren't looking at an HDR video on an HDR screen. Somebody screen captured like a dynamic crunched version of the HDR content and said it's darker. It's like, that HDR version of Lord of the Rings is so bright and crisp. It looks great. But you have to have a good TV to even see it. That reminds me, like the PSVR 2 is actually a really good HDR screen if you're willing to sit with that thing on your face. If the FPS was solved with Call of Duty 4, then there are only so many ways to go from there. That's a good point. You just make new maps. It's new content. That's what Call of Duty has been since Modern Warfare for the PS3 and Xbox 360 is the new game has a new campaign, which is really new maps. So it's each year you're buying an iteration of Call of Duty with a couple of things changed, but it's mainly the new maps. It's the new multiplayer thing that they've been selling for years now. And maybe the interest has fallen off a little bit about it, but the point is like they figured out that's the way that you do it, is that you offer new content. You don't need to like remake the game. You don't have to come up with new gameplay ideas. You keep the same gameplay ideas, and you just change up the maps. And that's enough interest to keep people interested in playing. Chris Gore, who had a lot of contacts in the film industry, has been releasing the Whistleblower Report series, The D-File, said that Marvel Studios just mass-fired all of its activist employees. I'll believe it when I see it. It'd be good, but, He says the effects of this firing likely won't show up on screen for 3 to 4 years. He said that Lucasfilm refused to do the same. Yeah, assuming it's true, right? Japanese business philosophy will rarely lay off, but sometimes a company can be saved, will go bankrupt because they don't do layoffs. And in Japan, it's very hard to be hired again. Star Wars is no more. I keep the old stuff. Yeah, I mean, that's why canon is dumb. It's like, Anakin is canonically wrong. I'm like, I don't care. Who cares? It's like, so? I don't care. He's whatever I want him to be. They have little content beyond Star Wars and Marvel. Have to review it all. Yeah, that's EFAP. Or like a lot of those shows, they just, that's their business model. They have to keep it going forever. And I could do that. Maybe I should have done that, but I care too much about my life. I care too much about myself. I care too much about, like, my time. I care about my soul. I care about my integrity, right? To keep doing that forever, or to, like, that's hell to me. Like, watching bad Star Wars content to make YouTube videos, it sounds like hell. It's like, doing a job, like watching something that you used to like be bad forever. That's like you're subjecting yourself to hell. To get paid money, there's lots of things we can do for money, guys, that aren't watching bad Star Wars and doing YouTube videos. We can go. I'd rather go cut lawns in 100-degree heat, because at least like that would energize my body. At least that would stress my body and make me healthier. And I could listen to audiobooks while I did it. It's almost as bad as being enrolled in autopay with the cell phone company and your bill doesn't get paid like 3 times and your phone gets shut off. Yes. Oh, I had this with something. There was something I had on autopay and they just like didn't do it and then said you have to pay your bill. Your bill is overdue. I'm like, why didn't you charge me this? And then they like charge you 3 times on one day. Why do people see franchises as a religion? Are they not allowed to follow actual religions? Yes, they aren't allowed to follow actual religions, actually. First of all, a lot of people from my generation especially grew up very spiritually poor. They didn't have a good church upbringing. Their parents were often like lapsed Catholics or lapsed evangelicals, or evangelicals who went to church but weren't super involved, and they didn't have a deep spiritual life. So we were raised materially rich and spiritually poor. And so you fill in that gap with other things that provide you with the moral guidance that church does, as well as the sense of meaning and self, which church does, right? If you go to church, that will often provide you with context for the way that your life exists, that like God cares about you, right? So that can fill in a lot of gaps there. But people create religious sentiments about lots of things. It's like I found a thing on Twitter. It's like your people are like, we're going to wear masks because it's our religion. It's like, it was always your religion. People wore masks for religious reasons, but they didn't recognize it as religion because they weren't saying like, I'm a Muslim who wears hijab, right? What they were saying is, I'm an atheist who wears a mask. So they have a religious approach to their beliefs, but they don't think of it as religion. So that's the hard part about talking to people about this stuff, right? Now, are you allowed to have actual religions? In many cases, you're not. I don't need to go too deep into this, but the state tends towards enforced atheism over time. Just to give you an example, let's say you don't believe in gay marriage. You don't believe that that's a thing and it's an offense to God. Well, if you're a clerk, if you're a county clerk, you have to certify gay marriages, which means you can't be a county clerk anymore, which means that the bureaucrats who run the state end up tending towards atheism over time. Because in order for you to do that job at a certain point, as things become more atheistic, you actually can't be religious and do your job. That may be a case for teachers. It's like many teachers maybe actually couldn't do their job and stay religious because they'd be required to teach things which are antithetical to their own religion. And if you look at it as that, as like orthodoxy matters, right? In a small o orthodoxy, like the straight way, saying and believing the correct things matters to your religion, then there's many cases where you wouldn't be able to, for example, be a public school teacher, which means that it tends towards atheism. So a lot of these people actually can't have their own religions because it costs them too much economically or socially. So they attach themselves to a different acceptable religion, the death cult, the woke religion, or Star Wars or something else, right? Unfortunately, most HDR is fake or done badly. The properly done ones are quite good, though. I agree. And this is another thing about HDR. Sometimes it's just like the display may have HDR mapping, but it's not really HDR. So some displays are HDR compatible, but they don't really show HDR properly. Sometimes it's in the full dynamic range space, but it's not really making use of it, and so you can't tell the difference. There's lots of things with HDR that are, fake or badly done. Yeah. They don't want to follow actual religion. I guess that's kind of my point. They see themselves as atheists and don't want to be duped or controlled, but human beings are hardwired to need some sort of religion. I agree. Even if they don't see it as such. It fills that void of identity and devotion for them, but not in a real way. I articulate like that like crap, but the character counts, Yeah, that's 100%. The point is, a religious sentiment, a religious feeling, a religious action doesn't necessarily follow from what we think of as religion. And keep in mind, most people are viewing religion through, the sort of the Christian lens of what religion is supposed to be, where you have a book, a holy book that's like the Word of God. You go to a place once a week and you worship a God in some fashion and you pray, and that's what religion is. If we step outside of that, or we take that lens off and we say, like, what do other people in the world consider religion? It could be Confucianism, where it would seem not a religion to us, but it qualifies as a religion if we're using different criteria to view it, and the people who practice it may view it as a religion. There are many religions that don't involve prayers at all. They involve doing sacrifices or something, right? So religion can take a lot of different forms. The point is, they have a religious sentiment of it. They believe that they must do this thing for some sort of spiritual satisfaction, right? It's like, it is good to wear the mask. Is basically like saying it is good to wear hijab. They're like, Allah wants me to wear hijab, right? That's a religious feeling. They're doing it for modesty purposes that have to do with their religion. They're wearing the mask for modesty purposes that have to do with religious sentiment as well. I loved Inquisition. Hide user from channel. Banned. It's the first Dragon Age game I played and got me into the series. I legit replayed it almost a dozen times. Man, I couldn't... I don't think I could get through it one time. You know. Religion, even if they don't see it as such, it fills that void. Yes, we've read that. Having HDR television and 4K Lord of the Rings discs have major problems. I already talked about this. I don't think there's any problems. I think they look better. I think the people that are trolls online about it, I don't know, they're blind or something. I think it's the best version, visually the best version of Lord of the Rings you can get. It's that modern HDR version. Looks really good. The usage of the word canon in pop culture is an incredible tell. Canon is a word used to explain the orthodoxy of the church or the continuity of the Bible. Yes. That's a very good tell. That's a great point. I sadly use it myself sometimes, but really only because other people know what I mean by it. I mean, can't you make the argument that that's what professional critics do? Watch lots of crap to find the diamond in the rough. Yeah, but they will watch lots of things, not just Star Wars. And the point is to create consumer information with a critic. So I watch this so you don't have to. Well, that's not what EFAP is. That's not what Doomcock and these other channels do. They basically are hopping in to have a conversation with people who also watched it, including the viewers, to talk about why they hate it and to hate on it and to kind of create invocations of firing Kathleen Kennedy or whatever the hell else they're doing, right? It's somewhat religious, right? It's the equivalent of going to church for them, but it's all negative. Like, I can't imagine how hellish that experience must be for them. Versus, like, if I decide I'm going to be a movie critic and I watch every movie every week that comes out and I do a review of every movie like I'm Roger Ebert, so that you know which ones to watch and which ones to avoid because you have money and you're going to the cinema. That's the purpose of movie critics. Music critics, same thing, because you used to just have to buy them out, right? Yeah. I don't view them as critics because I think they don't actually perform a consumer function. It's more about the zeal of a religious experience, of them hating on it with the viewers, you know. Yeah, and I don't think they're anything close to like a Roger Ebert that, like, do they review horror movies? Do they review every movie that comes out? I think they just stick to stuff that's in the nerd space. That's like Star Wars, and really don't talk about too much else. It's like Marvel and Star Wars, because that's in the nerd space, and they really don't. But like, my point is, like, why don't I do that? Why don't I just fade away? I don't do that because I care about my experiences in this life being good. I have enough consumer information to know that it's going to be bad. So I'm not going to subject myself to it, especially if I'm not going to make a lot of money from it at this point. So it goes for like almost anything. The pop culture perception of Christianity through things like televangelists has done a lot of damage to the Christian religion, among other things. You almost can't blame people. Well, they have to have lost the faith in order to think that that's the faith to begin with. And that's a real problem too. Is that when it became socially acceptable to like not go to church, a lot of people just stopped going. They became lapsed. And so that sort of thing is almost inevitable. I'm out of time now. I've gone for 2 hours talking about this stuff. It's great. Well, in Islam, women are supposed to cover their hair. Hijab specifically isn't mentioned. Yes. But my point is, like, I'm doing this for the modesty purposes of my religion. It's not, you know, you can do it with burqas and stuff too. I'm choosing hijab because that's one of the ways that they do that. So I agree 100%. Right. And that's not a negative. That's nothing negative against Islam. I'm just drawing a parallel there, right? It's like a woman covers her head for a purpose that's religious, and a person covers his face for a purpose that's religious as well. I heard that bishops used to go into battle like knights during the Middle Ages. I don't think they did, but bishops performed many functions, actually. Christians need to be more discerning and do, some policing within their own ranks. Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree, but you know, music critics have always been an anomaly to me. I understand critics for films, books, and games, since those can be time sinks. Music, you can just sample it. I wouldn't. Like if I do an album review, now I don't do album reviews because YouTube severely punishes me whenever I talk about music. But, when I do an album review, I listen to the entire album beginning to end. And I think about the production. I think about the songwriting. I think about the performances. I think about all that stuff. Yeah, most of these channels ignore anything that isn't a brand name, whether it's good or bad. Now, I don't actually, I'm criticizing them, but I don't actually hate them for, like, that's their business. Their business is talking about bad pop culture stuff. And so they better hope it's always bad forever and no one will watch their channel. This is different from, like, I've had him on the channel, I think. Geekdom 101. Where he does like a lot of lore videos on like Dragon Ball Z and stuff like that. And he really loves Dragon Ball Z and he loves Star Wars. And that's great. It's not a criticism channel. It's not a movie critic channel. It's more like a lore fandom channel. So that's great. Versus making your entire channel about shitting on whatever thing. I've done some music reviews, like on Substack and stuff. I'm not sure where it fits into like the grand scheme of what I'm doing though. So, yeah. All right. I think that's about it for today. I'll see you guys all next time. Let me link all the stuff. New copies of the Live Write are up on Patreon and Substack. So you can grab those. So I'll link those. New Substack articles are coming. I meant to talk about this today, but I'll talk about it some other time. It's like right now, I'm just going to write a bunch of articles. Do you ever do harmonic analysis on YouTube? I don't, because to play the music on YouTube is to risk a copyright strike. YouTube is very bad for letting anyone hear music, and it's really bad for reviewing music as well. I don't know why. It's been that way for years at this point. You used to be able to review album reviews, but it just got really bad to where you basically would nuke your channel by doing an album review. Don't know why. And I'll just say something is like, some of these other guys may be positive, but one of the things that happens that I notice is that if you are positive, that will not get views. It's the negativity that gets the views. So temper my criticism with some salt, knowing that chances are if they're talking about something positive, you're not going to see it as much. You're just not, right? YouTube will not show it. People won't click on it. But they want the salt. The audience wants the salt. They want the anger. They want the bitterness. It gets rewarded. So I can't really fault them for doing more of what rewards them. If they get rewarded for doing Star Wars content and that's how they feel like they need to make their money, then that's what they're going to do. And if they feel like it's tolerable to listen to. But for me, my whole career is going to be shitting on Star Wars. I gotta step away from that. I gotta do something else. So anyway, thanks. I really appreciate the chat. This is a really good chat. Thank you, Hardwick, for dropping in. Goblin, Sound Engraver for dropping in. I always appreciate you. And you should subscribe to her channel. She's always got like a lot of interesting stuff, and she does music as well. So that's great. Chris Gore's main passion is indie movies and reviews a ton of them. That's great. One of the problems I've talked about is like, let's say I review an indie movie. It gets 200 views. Whereas if I'm like, let me tell you why Dune 2 sucks, it's like 5,000 views. 10,000 views. Sky's the limit. It's really demoralizing. It's just demoralizing that that's the way that the robot works. But that's what we have to deal with. You have to deal with it. It's like I love that someone can be positive and find something positive to say about anything. But chances are that's not what people are going to watch. They're going to watch the negative shit. It's unfortunate, but it's true. So you have to kind of balance it. I always try to talk about some positive things that I like, but when I look at the numbers and it's like the negative thing made you $50 and the positive thing made you 50 cents, it just gets a little depressing, you know. Chris Gore once explained a strategy for how he used his reviews of mainstream stuff to get eyes on his indie movie reviews. Yeah, I've talked about this a little bit in the Keys to Prolific Creativity book about balancing this. You don't want people to feel bad about your content, so you do need to have positive stuff that interests them. But the robot just really likes the negative stuff, and negative stuff just has a bigger viral potential. It just does. So you kind of have to balance those things out in order to get people thinking positively about what you want to show them, whether it's yours or it's something else. It's really important to have a balance there, even if you're doing negative stuff. You know. Anyway, I will see you all next time. Have a great one. I think I linked everything. Is there any books? Buy Sorcerer's Blood. I wrote this live on the stream. I think it has 2 ratings. That's cool. It should have 10. 10 is what would be good. It's a cheap book. It's cool. We wrote it on the stream. We had fun with it. $5.99 paperback, 99-cent Kindle ebook if you want the electronic version. It's cool. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Have a great one. Fading away.